Testing, check, check. So welcome to the Ninja Robot Studio LLC stream where I play video games and VR experiences and talk through them from the UX designer's perspective because game design has a very heavy and direct influence on XR design. So it makes sense that we would study game design in order to create better and more immersive quality experiences. And some people may be thinking, well, I'm going to be creating um, productivity apps. What does gaming have to do with that? Actually, it has everything to do with that because how we interact with video games, that mental model is going to translate into XR and already does. So even if you're creating productivity apps, you're going to want to get inspiration from game design. So that's what I do here on Thursdays. I play through games and I go by genre. I've done tabletop RPGs and I've done platformers and training sims, and now I'm working on branching narrative. And you can check out all of those past streams here on YouTube. And so quickly, I want to explain what branching narrative is. Get that explanation up. These articles you can check out. I'm putting this one in the chat. Highly recommend the set of articles. It's a very nice explanation of what branching narrative is. It is basically it's a series of articles as well. There are 3 articles in this series. You can get the links down at the bottom of the article. Um, Usually, whenever you experience a story, it's linear. There's a plot conflict, there's a plot twist, there's a struggle, there's a start and end, and a struggle in between. And it's very linear. And sometimes, whenever you're playing games, that will also there will also be some games like this. And whenever I play those games, I tend to be more bored with those games than I am with any of that give you any kind of choice or freedom to play the way you want to play. So usually these types of games are more incredibly passive and boring to me. Some people enjoy them, but I usually don't. And a lot of people don't. But branching narrative is where instead of having that long linear thing, there are different ways of doing the story. So this is example, and this article goes through different types of branching narrative, is they're calling it string of pearls, where yes, you do have that main plot line of the game and your choices don't really affect the outcome, but you can do side quests that then see my mouse, no, you get my mouse going and see it how it's showing, so that then you've got side quests here that go off and do additional stories, and those can branch off into different stories, but they're not affecting the main story. So this is one type. This is a common type of game. And then there's a bottleneck type, and some games will have actually multiple types of branching narrative throughout them. I've seen and played games where they'll start at a common point and then they'll branch off depending on a decision that you've made, and then they'll come back together at some point for some kind of um, storyline. And Fire Emblem Three Houses feels like this type of scenario. You start at the same point, and then depending on which house you decide to go with, like which group you decide to go with, you have a completely different story, and then it converges at some point, and then it'll trail off again at some point and come back together for the final story. And so your choices matter in that, but the actual overall overarching story does not change. Um, and then there are some where you can just loop and skip, and it can get more and more complicated depending on the complexity of the game. And then there's also the map of many endings, where your choice actually really does matter, and it matters to the outcome of the game altogether. And Undertales like that. There are multiple games like that where the choices actually really do matter to the end of the game. And um, my brain is going blank, but there are more games like that out there than Undertale. Like Pillars of Eternity, I think, is similar to this, and it's actually pretty cool how they set up that game because your choices along the way matter to the end of the story, and then they actually affect the next game. So if you download and play the next game on the same computer or PlayStation, the same account, you can continue. That story will be affected by how you finished the first game, which is pretty cool. They do that. You can, of course, choose to start from scratch and not and play the game differently, but you have that option, that freedom of starting it off and picking it up based on how it ended in the first game, which is pretty cool. And then there's a true open world type of game where you're going to eventually end up at some ending, but how you get there is completely up to you. It's completely open world. This is a lot of freedom to roam and so forth. And this is, you'll see that there are plot lines and that they converge at some point, but there is a whole lot of freedom going on in the middle here. So these are different types of branching narrative, and we're going to be looking at, and like I said, there are some games that have all different kinds, like they could have all of these different types in the same game. Like Genshin Impact, which is the one we're looking at today, has String of Pearls. It has side quests that go off into other stories, and it has what's called a these side quests is what we're actually looking at today. They're called Hangout events, where your choices matter in the ending of the story. And this is all within the same game, but there's like side quests that can have maps of many endings and so forth. And that's how some games choose to do it, and it makes it more interesting. It makes it a more fun game to play when you have all these different options in how you play. That's what we're looking at today. So let me go and get to look at Genshin Impact. Again, these are called the Hangout events. I'm not quite sure what level you have to be to unlock these, but there's a method that you have to go through to unlock the events using keys, and you have to be a certain level and so forth. But I haven't played very many of them. I've only played one, which is this Shikanon Hazel Hangout story, and they are kind of cheesy. But if you look up in the top, you have to do a bunch of other side quests to open up story keys, which will then unlock these games. And so I've done this one, and this one's actually a good example of that branching narrative, because you can see here visually how it works, the branching narrative. So you're starting out at a single point where the storyline starts, and then you have a moment of decision, and that moment of decision is here at during this quest line. And then depending on which decision you make here, you're branching off into another option. So you either decide to go with them on this one journey or go back and do this other thing, your choice. And then those then branch off depending on which let's look at the top one. That one is just a straight line. So once you've made that original choice, that's it. You're going to continue down this straight line, and it's hard to do this with a controller. And then you just go down the plot line and you finally come to your conclusion, and that's it. That's the end of the story, and you're rewarded with a nice, pretty image because they're really good at their visual imagery here. And this game's really good. Or if we decide to go the other route, then we have multiple moments of decision. And at this time, we look at the case files in this case and decide which one we're going to look at. Is Hazo's the detective? And depending on which one we decide to look at, we go on completely different quest lines. And there are 5 total options, possible endings in this. All completely different endings, depending on what decision you make. And yeah, this is an example of map of many endings that we just looked at, where you have multiple options. So today we're just going to be playing through a new Hangout event that I've unlocked, and that is this one with Faruzan. And you can see here on the little info card that they tell you how many possible endings there are, and you can see the map as you go. It'll unfold. There are 5 possible endings, 6 possible endings, 12 possible endings. Wow, 12. But I haven't unlocked that one yet. I need to look at that one. So yeah, and these are all just mini stories within the bigger game about some of the characters that you come across. So we're gonna look at Faruzan, and I do apologize that some of these are a bit fan servicey. So see what this one is. A confounding conundrum. So now I'm gonna have to go find where this quest line starts. Go to... It wouldn't respond to my controller when I was trying to hit to open up the map. Go to Sumeru. This game is similar to a lot of people. It's an open world game, open map game. So there's multiple of those types out there in the world now. Similar in a way to Breath of the Wild, in that it's very open world and you explore the world and unlock the map and come across world quests and things like that. However, there is still a bigger story, an overarching story.
Now, 教令員のいろんな制約はかなり緩和されてきてるんだけど、それでもやっぱり先輩がマハマトラに絡まれたりしてないか心配なんだよね。
Even though most of the academia's restrictions have significantly relaxed, I'm still a bit worried that the Matra might give her trouble. I need to stay here to keep an eye on the situation.
コレイ、スメイルシティに行ってどうして先輩がまだ来ないのか見てきてくれない？
I need to stay here and keep an eye on the situation. Kole, can you head to Sumeru City and find out why she isn't here yet? Does it have to be me?
すごく大事なことだからね。信頼できる人に任せた方がいいと思ったんだけど。隊長、まだ悪いの？
I'd only assign a job that's important to someone I trust. Are you not feeling well?
平気。私の病気ならもうすっかり治ったんだ。ただ、師匠の先輩に会うとなると、ちょっと心の準備が必要っていうか。
I'm fine. I've completely recovered. It's just that if I'm going to see her, I need to mentally prepare myself first.
まあ確かに 君一人で先輩に会いに行かせるのはちょっと無理難題だったかもね。
I
一緒
know
に行っ
you'll
てく
have
れ
a
る人
tough
がいれば。
time. We could arrange for someone to accompany you, and then I come at the most opportune moment. And you'll see up at the top, right, that there are hearts here, and those hearts are affected by my choices as well, whether or not I'm able to please the person I'm hanging out with. And a lot of games do this. Fire Emblem Three Houses does this because you build relationships and that affects the game and how you play together. When we were playing Wilder Myth, our decisions about relationships affected the gameplay and how you helped each other. Persona 5 does that as well, where your decisions and how you develop the relationships with the people that you come across in the game affects how you fight together and so forth. So, and like story decisions later whenever you need help, so forth. I haven't completely seen how it works out here. Um, so far, this feels more like fan service than it does an actual affecting this story in any way. In a predicament, I see.
お、旅人だ。
Hi
久
there.
しぶり。いいところに来てくれたね。コレイと一緒にスメールシティに行ってくれないかなってちょうど思っていたところだよ。
Been a while. What a coincidence. I was just thinking about asking you to accompany Kole to Sumeru City. And then I have two options here. I can either choose why do you think of me, or what made you think I have time on my hands. So I'm gonna go with why do you think of me.
ごめん、そういうわけじゃないんだ。
Sorry, that's
この
not what I
件は
meant.
教練員に禁止された研究に関わってて、あまり他の人にペラペラ言えることじゃないんだ。
Sorry, that's not what I meant. It's just that this matter concerns research banned by the academia, not the sort of thing you'd shout from the rooftops.
それに、この件のことは君も知ってる。今完全に信頼できる人は少ないからね。熟考した末、やっぱり君に頼むのが一番だと思ってさ。
Also, you happen to know about the situation. There are very few people I can trust to be discreet right now. After giving it much thought, I believe you're the most suitable person for this task. And so then, and something that I know about, or research banned by the academia.
うん。理由はちょっと複雑だし、ここで話すのもなんだから。後で先輩が来た後に、また詳しく話すよ。
It's complicated, and this isn't the best place to talk about it. We'll fill you in on the details once she arrives. Who's she?
もしかしたら、スメールシティですでに先輩のことを耳にしたことがあるかもしれないね。ファルザンっていう経験豊富な大先輩だ。
So, with branching narrative, it's another thing that makes the conversation more interesting when you're given choices of your response. One of the problems that I often have in games is like one I was playing last night, I was checking out their Honkai Star Rail game because it also has branching narrative or branching dialogue, is what that would be called, because it gives you a choice of your decisions in your actual conversation. And that's what we're going through right now, which is a sub option of branching narrative, is your dialogue. And then your dialogue along the way makes the decision of how your narrative goes. But then you also have like nuanced decisions in how you can respond to that's called branching dialogue. Right now, I only have one option, but every now and then I'll have two or three options. You might have heard of her about her in Sumeru before. Her name is Faruzan, and she's a very experienced senior researcher.
そう。この100年にわたる妙論派のギミック研究。その大部分は、彼女の残した論述や原稿をもとに発展してきたものなんだ。
Let's just say that a huge part of, I have no idea how to say that, Sharuwar, I have no idea. Mechanical research over the past 100 years have used her academic discourse and manuscripts as their foundation. 100 years, is she human? Also, branching dialogue and branching narrative comes in very usefully for training sims, and that's where my background comes from. So, any kind of online or um, safety training, any kind of situational training, empathy training, cultural training, language training, all of those things can benefit from branching narrative and branching dialogue, which is why I'm studying it, is because when I first got into this whole XR industry, my first, what I worked on first was training, VR training. And so I and in that safety training, in that safety training with consequences, so that would be a choices matters um, map of many endings type of scenario. We had to use branching narrative to help the trainees make decisions, and then based on those decisions that they made would depend on whether or not they had a safe outcome or not so safe outcome or a completely devastating outcome. So that's where branching narrative really, really shines within the XR industry, not just for games, but for also very important training and so forth. So branching narrative is not just for games, first and foremost. It is also for any kind of immersive experience where you are trying to convey a message or teach somebody something or to entertain as well.
いや、正真正銘の人間だよ。ただ、ある事故で100年間も消えてしまっていたんだ。そ
She
の
is
後荒野で発見されて、教令院にお戻りになったのは、ここ数年のことだ。
She is, but she vanished for 100 years because of a certain incident. She only returned to the academia after being found in the wilderness a few years ago.
おかげで、先輩の性格は、なんというか、まあ、ちょっと変わってる。それと、コレイに対する態度もね。
Because of that, her current personality can be a bit strange, as is her attitude towards Kole.
考えただけで頭が痛くなってきた。
Getting a headache just thinking about it.
先輩は悪意を持ってるわけじゃないんだし、そこまでひるむ必要はないと思うけど。
She doesn't have bad intentions, so you don't have to be scared.
はい、わかりました。頑張ってみる。はあ、
She said a lot more than I'll try. Said, actually, I understand. I'll do my best. Do we really have to invite her here?
妙論派とソロン派の学者たちは先入観にとらわれがちだしね。この件を彼らに任せるのはどうにも安心できないよ。
So, Sharawar and Spantamad researchers are often quite prejudiced, so I can't trust them with this matter.
でも、ファルザン先輩なら、ここ最近の考え方に左右されることはない。手紙のやり取りでも協力したいって言ってくれたしね。
However, Farzan isn't influenced by modern thinking. In our previous correspondence through letters, she indicated she'd be willing to help.
ただ、約束の時間からだいぶ経つのに、まだパルディスディアイに来てないんだ。
It's already past our arranged meeting time, but she still hasn't shown up. Did she get caught by the academia?
そうとは限らないけど、先輩の性格からすると、他のトラブルに巻き込まれた可能性が高い。
I don't think so. With her personality, it's more likely she got wrapped up in some sort of
と
trouble.
にかく、コレイと一緒に教令院まで行って、ファルザン先輩の様子を見てきてくれない？
Anyway, can you go with Kole to the academia and check on Farzan for me? Sure thing.
よかった。口から心臓が飛び出るところだった。
You thank goodness I was so anxious.
それじゃあ頼んだよ。これいい？あまり無理はしないで。状況を確認できればそれでいいから。
I'm counting on you too, Cole. Don't push yourself too hard. Just go there and see what's going on.
こっちの件は重要だけど、まだ緊急ってほどじゃない。もし先輩が本当にトラブルに巻き込まれてたんなら、直接戻って僕に伝えて。そしたら日を改めるから。
Our task is important, but not that urgent. If Farzan really is in trouble, come back and tell me about it. We can always reschedule our meeting.
何しろ、面倒ごとを抱えたままじゃ、今後の問題処理にも影響が出るからね。
After all, if she's distracted by other things, it'll affect her ability to help us.
わかった。今すぐ行ってくるよ。
All right, let's go. Okay. Now, I'm pressing L3. Okay, it's just showing it on the map. I thought it was going to bring up the map because that does what it does in other games. But I'll just bring it. Studying game maps and how game maps are designed is also a really important thing to do. I talk about it in my video that I have on wayfinding. Because
はあ？なんじゃと？もう一回言ってくれぬか？年だから耳が遠いのじゃ。
it's going to inspire how we design wayfinding in real life. There are mental models that people have on 3D navigation that game map design can heavily influence. So it's good if you're getting into that field and you're wanting to create wayfinding for XR games or for real life navigation. Game maps is a good place to start. And again, I talk about that in that video, wayfinding, and it's on here on YouTube. I'll try to find it later. Or you can just search my channel afterwards. So sorry, what did you say? Could you repeat yourself? As you know, I'm sure hearing goes with age.
ですから、ファルザンさん、いい加減答えを出してくれませんか？
Partizana says you need to give us an answer.
ところでお前、先輩をつけることを忘れておらぬか？
Ah, yes, and did you forget to add madam when you addressed me earlier?
もう、はっきり聞こえてるんじゃないですか。
Hearing's perfectly fine.
ファルザン、先輩。私だってあなたに難癖をつけるつもりはなかったんです。でも、あなたはここ数年何の授業もしていませんし、学生を連れて研究課題に取り組んだこともありません。
Now, Madam Faruzan, we don't want to make things difficult for you. However, you haven't been teaching courses or supervising theses these past few years. And one of the things that you're going to miss, is going to get lost in translation here, is that when Faruzan speaks, she's speaking in a very old style of Japanese that isn't used anymore. Makes it more entertaining if you actually understand the language and culture.
指導教員としてさすがに良くないんじゃないですか？もう学生たちだけでなく、他の先生たちまで文句を言い始めてるんですよ。
Isn't this rather problematic as an advisor? Never mind the students, even other advisors are starting to complain.
ほう？一体誰じゃ？わしに文句があるなら、直接わしのところに来いと伝えておくがよい。お前らの時間を無駄にする必要はない。
Yeah, it's just completely lost in translation. It's I'm not sure how you would even convert that into English, because unless you tried to do like very old Shakespearean English, maybe. That's the only thing I could think of, or even old English. But then you wouldn't be able to understand it. and who, if I might ask, complained. If they have any issues with me, tell them to talk to me themselves rather than waste any of your time.
それは
Um,
言われずとも分かっておる。また知論派の連中じゃろ。たく、奴らには時間をもっとまともな研究に使ってほしいもんじゃの。
you don't have to tell me anything. I very well know that it's those people from Haravatat. How I wish they'd put their time into doing proper research instead.
ですがファルザン先輩ご自身も長い間実際的な学術成果を出していらっしゃいませんよね
But Madame Faruzan, it's been a long while since you last made any practical contribution yourself.
学術成果に実際的も何もあるまい。審査責任者が知識の本質を理解しておらぬだけじゃ。
Academic contribution cannot simply be divided between the tangible and the intangible. The issue here, I believe, is that the reviewer doesn't understand the very nature of knowledge itself.
そもそもその指標を指導教員の評価に入れること自体何の意味もないことであろう。一体何代目の賢者が定めた規則なんじゃ。今すぐ手紙を書いて解き伏せてこよう。
In any case, it makes no sense to use a metric like this to evaluate a mentor. Which sage set this rule anyway? I should write a letter of complaint, write this assistant. So another thing that's very important that if you're looking at creating an XR experience with branching narrative, branching dialogue, is to look at how the NPCs behave, how they're rigged and how they are animated while they're talking to each other or you, and what they're doing while they're waiting for a response or for you to continue. Because here, and also the whole concept of autoplay, so let's break that down by each. So I mentioned NPC behavior first, right? So you'll see that she is looking at who she's talking to, which isn't us, she's talking to somebody else. But her body is in a pose that's mid-conversation while she waits. So she's moving, she's waiting, and she's looking at the person that she's talking to. And pay attention to that, because that really matters when you're getting into XR, especially because if you don't pay attention to how your NPCs behave when you're creating XR experiences, it can be very weird and very uncomfortable very quickly. And best case, it's just awkward and it breaks your immersion. Worst case, it makes you feel bad. Like, for example, when I first got into this, when the first time I ever had to work on a training experience that had NPCs talking to each other like this with branching narrative in VR, the first time I got a build, what's called a build is when they send you a test version of what they're working on. The developers will send the designer and the team or whoever a test version. It's called a build, so that you can give it a try and give them feedback and shift directions wherever you need to shift directions. First time I got the build with the NPCs and the dialogue working, it was incredibly awkward because the NPCs would talk to me, but they wouldn't look at me. So that made me feel like they didn't respect me. So I felt disrespected and ignored, even though they were actually talking to me. So the fact that their body language was not designed correctly at that point, it was still early, but it made me very quickly realize, hey, NPC behavior is incredibly important when we're designing experiences where we have NPCs talking to each other. So it's very important to pay attention, and gaming is a very important way to study how to do this and translate that into 3D, into whatever it is you're doing, because they've figured this out and they do it very well. So NPC behavior is very important. And another thing with branching narrative that's very important is you'll see that I have the option here to autoplay, but I don't have it on autoplay. By default, it's on, I think it's by default. I would prefer it to be by default. By default, it's on manual progression. And that's because it takes different people different amounts of time to read, and also things outside of the game or the experience can happen and distract you. So, to keep you from missing important information, especially if you're dealing with training, to keep you from missing important information, you keep it on manual progression. So, I tell it when to progress instead of it just progressing for me, because different people read at different rates. And when you're dealing with XR, just like here in the game, you want to accompany the voice with text because distraction happens. And so accompanying the voice with the text helps you to process what you're learning, which is important in a game to get the story, but it's incredibly important when you're creating training experiences or whatever. So, manual progression with the option to autoplay if somebody doesn't want to, if somebody is faster at processing and they can handle it, and they don't mind that the distractions aren't bothering them and they can continue on, then great. Then they have the option to autoplay. But they've also set it up to where people who do have a hard time and who get distracted a lot by outside means or something, or in the case of training with the classroom, where you're talking to a team or you're talking to a trainer or you're talking to other students, then you have the time to have a conversation like we're having right now without the game continuing to progress in dialogue, and which is completely hard to. You can't learn and you can't concentrate and you can't with multiple things going on at the same time. You're gonna only be able to focus on one thing, or you're gonna miss something. So that's why it's important to have that manual progression, and it's important to pay attention to how the NPCs are behaving and how they're rigged and what they're doing while they're waiting for you to respond to them and while they're talking to you. Incredibly important when you're dealing with XR spatial computing, because it's way more noticeable when you're in that situation yourself. So, I think that's all I had to say. So I'm gonna progress now.
ちょっと待ってください。ファルさん先輩、話を最後まで聞いてください。
Wait, Madame Farazan, please let me finish. Or like in this case, different languages, because not everyone speaks the language that is being spoken, and so they need more time to process. Manual progression will help with that, especially when you're dealing with a multicultural team. Very important.
やっぱりファルザン先輩だ。でも隣にいるのはマハマトラじゃないよな。
That's her, all right, but the person with her doesn't look like a Matra. She looks so young.
ファルザン先輩は若いって言われるのが一番嫌いなんだ。
Hates it when people call her young.
先輩は
I used to hate that.
100年間体の成長も止まってたみたいなんだ。だから今は100年前と同じ姿でいる。
Always looks much younger than I am. So I used to absolutely hate when I was adult and people thought I was a child, but now I appreciate it because I'm much older now. And they don't think I'm a child, but they think I'm younger than I am. So her body apparently stopped aging during the years when she was gone, so that's why she looks the same as she did 100 years ago. So she disappeared for 100 years. What in the world happened to her? So this is one of the weird things that I've only noticed here in Genshin is that this is a continuation of the same sentence. These two options here are basically the same sentence. So sometimes, it doesn't matter what you pick. Just pick something in those cases.
心の準備もほぼできたし、行こう。
Okay, I think I'm ready for this. Let's go.
とにかく、アジャンタ彫刻展と妙論派の責任者はみんな、ファルザン先輩がこの研究課題に参加してくださることを強く願っています。
Anyway, Akara Crafts and the leader of Sharawar would like to invite you to collaborate on this project.
ですから興味がおありかは分かりませんがってファールザン先輩聞いてますか？
They're wondering if you'd be interested, and Madame Farazan, are you listening?
おも。これは
Mm-hmm.
高齢ではないか。なぜ教令員に？体の方はどうなんじゃ？
Colette, why are you here at the academia? Are you feeling better now? I think she just treats people like she's a grandma. So she's basically imagine how your grandma talks and is an older style of talking, and how if you have been able to interact with your grandma. I haven't because I died a long time ago, but that's what I'm imagining, I guess, how they talk. Maybe. Is that really that different in English? This is something that just really gets lost in translation. Which is also something to think about when you're doing training. If that were something that was important to the story, you would have to figure out how would you do that? How would you translate that? Multi-language creation of training or anything in XR, anything period, is going to be really important. You want natives of that language, native speakers, to translate it into that language. People who are able to speak both languages fluently and translate them, because things can get lost in translation, and in training that could be very important. So you want to really pay attention to that, how you're translating it to convey the story, because it's getting lost in English. But I can't stand the English voice actors, so stand them to do Japanese.
よくなったよ、ファルザン先輩。旅人とクラクサンナリデビ様のおかげで。
I'm much better, Madame Farzan. It's all thanks to Arisa and the Dendro Archon.
最近はよく眠れておるのか？
Yeah, she acts like a grandma.
できておるようじゃが。ティナリのやつはまたお前を夜遅くまで勉強させておったのか？
Or a mother. Have you been sleeping well? You seem to be developing some eye bags. Is that brat Tinari forcing you to stay up late again?
いや、違うんだ。ただ、私の覚えが悪いだけで、師匠とは何の関係もないんだ。
Because I'm a slow learner, it's not Master's fault.
学問を好むのは良いことじゃが、体が一番大事なんじゃからな。後でティナリにきちんと伝えておかねば。それから需要のある食べ物も持ってきてやろう。
It's good to be hardworking, but you need to take care of your health. I'll have to give Tinari a right talking to when I see him. I'll also prepare some health supplements for you. Yeah.
いや、大丈夫だ。本当に。
There's really no need.
お前の隣におるこやつは伝説の旅人か？
And is the person beside you the legendary Arisa? Pleasure to meet your acquaintance, madam. So you can choose your own name. I chose Arisa because it's Japanese for Aletha. And so they take that into account whenever they're creating their narrative, that they can insert your name. But if you pay attention to voice actors, and this is also something important, how you handle voice acting and changes in the game dialogue, is the voice actor's not actually saying my name, they're saying traveler or tabibito in Japanese, because you are the traveler in the game. And this is how you'll see it in all the different games. They'll have some kind of name for you that they say. That's going to save a lot of time on voice acting whenever you're so thinking about that, thinking out how the voice actors are going to handle the branching narrative is important, and how do you handle changes that come up later on in the design production process that are going to affect having to call back the voice actors to redo dialogue is going to affect the timelines and the cost of your game. So managing up front that, getting that dialogue down well up front and figuring out here's our branching dialogue, here's how everything's affected before you get the voice actors in there to actually record can help. So you could actually produce the game and get it to where it's in a good spot by using um, stand-in voice or computer until you get to a good enough point, and that's an option. I mean, I would say talk to other game developers and say how do they handle this. I would like to know myself, but some kind of stand-in voice until you can get the dialogue down good and where you want it, and then um, figure out how can you change the actual voice acting so that if you have a varied name or anything like that and an option that you don't have to record every single individual thing and figure that out because the names are numerous, as numerous as there are players. So they can't voice act every single thing unless you used synth or something, which could sound weird. I guess nowadays it's going to be better with AI, but if you're using actual voice actors, then I have seen training where they use AI voices, and it sounds terrible. Um, it's very flat. You want emotion, you want intonation. Those things really matter. So I would say keep the humans, but figure out a way to write the dialogue in such a way that you don't have to, that you're more efficient in how you record the voice acting so that you don't have to keep making changes in the future and so forth. All of that matters in the production process. And I would be very interested to know how other like big game design companies handle that voice acting aspect of figuring out when to record the voices and what happens when we have to make changes, or how do we handle that writing process so that we don't have to go back and make changes later. Because I have seen in some games where they just delete the voice acting from that spot and you don't hear them talk at all and you'll just read dialogue, which is suboptimal, but I have seen that be the solution. Wouldn't recommend it. And figure out a way to not have to do that. That would be ideal. Pleasure to meet your. That's weird. Meet your acquaintance. It's make your acquaintance. Weird.
ほう、うむ。お前と仲間たちのことは聞いておるぞ。いつか会ってみたいと常々思っておった。
Oh, I've heard much about you before. In fact, I've been meaning to meet you for a while now. And pay attention. She's looking at me now, talking to me, and she's in a posture waiting for my response. Still looking at me. So pay attention to that NPC behavior as well.
お前のおかげで教令員はやっと少しはまともになってきたの。それにコレイの病気のこともな。
It is thanks to you, after all, that the academia is finally getting back on its feet. Even Kolei's illness is.
ファールさん先輩、まだアジャンタ彫刻展との共同研究について話してるんですけど。
Madam Farzan, I believe we were still discussing the collaboration with the Akara Crafts.
どうせ妙論派の奴らはこれを機にわしを説得して奴らの学院に引き込もうと狙っておるんじゃろ。これ以上言い立てられても無駄じゃ。わしは研究方向を変える気なんざさらさらない。
I'd wager it's those Sharu or dunderheads finding excuses so that I'd go to their darshan. Say no more. I have no plans to change my field of research.
もしどうしても共同研究に参加したくないとおっしゃるのであれば、新しい授業を開いてはいただけませんか?
If you're this unwilling to participate in the collaborative project, you can also consider teaching a class.
知論派の範疇の授業となると、多少開きづらいかもしれませんが、いずれにせよ、もうこれ以上先延ばしにはできませんから、どうか答えを出してください。
It might be difficult to teach a course with topics that only fall within Haravatat subjects, but we can't delay this anymore. You need to give an answer.
授業を開いていただくのも共同研究に参加していただくのももう先輩に何とかしてもらうしかないんです。私たちだって意見ある学生や先生たちを説得できません。
You can teach a course or participate in a collaborative project. If you don't do either, it'll be hard for me to persuade the advisors and students who've been complaining. This sounds like some internal academia dispute. This seems to have nothing to do with request. I'm gonna choose the
あ
first
と
one.
数日伸ばしてくれんか。どうせもう長い間放っておいてきた問題じゃろうが。
Could you not give me a few more days to consider? This matter has been delayed for so long already.
ずっと先延ばしにしてきたからこそ困るんですよ。もし今日結論が出なければ明日にでも賢者のところに訴え出るものが出てくるでしょう。
That's precisely the issue. If you don't give an answer today, I fear that someone will soon escalate their complaints to the sages.
どうやら本当に暇な奴らのようじゃの。お前
What
た
a
ち
waste
ティナリの
of
こと
free
できた
time
ん
these
じゃろ。
folks are.
すまんがこの状況じゃ。日を改めてまた行くことになるかもしれぬ。
Now you two are here at Tinari's behest, I take it. I'm sorry, but given the current situation, it looks like I'll have to come over some other day.
でも
Well, it seems like she wants to say something. Please give me a moment with Kale.
おむ、わしもじっくり考えねば。
Of course, I shall need some time to think as well.
どうしよう。ファルザン先輩はまだやることがいっぱいあるみたいだ。
But now she seems so busy.
師匠は緊急じゃないって口では言ってたけど、私知ってるんだ。師匠はもう何日もガンダルバー村に戻ってなくて、パルディスティアイでずっと何か忙しそうにしてる。
Master said there's no rush, but I know that he's been busy working on something at Party's day. So he hasn't returned to Kandarville for several days now.
ファルザン先輩にはちょっと申し訳ないけど、やっぱりまずは一緒に来てもらうしかない。
Feel for Madame Farzan, but I still want to ask her to come with
で
us.
も、そのせいで教令員から責任を問われて、結局師匠を助ける余裕もなくなったらどうしよう。
But if I get her in
痛くなってきた。
if I get her in trouble with the academia, then she won't have the time to help Master. What should I do? Such a headache. Let's help her resolve her current problem first. Let's think of some way to get her to Party's guy. I'm gonna go with the first option.
ファルザン先輩にとっても師匠にとってもそれがいいかもしれない。後で私に手伝えることがないか師匠に聞いてみるよ。
Yeah, that would be best for them both. I'll check with Master later and see if there's anything I can help him with.
師匠はきっと君がしっかり勉強して補習の頻度を減らしてくれればそれが一番の助けになるとかって言うだろうけど。
But I'm sure he'll say the best thing you can do now is study hard so I don't have to give you remedial lessons. And my only option here is I can stay and help Faruza.
ああ、それならファルザン先輩も早く問題を解決できるし、師匠に会いに行けるよな。
It's actually also important to pay attention to the UI right now. Because there are certain indicators here saying what you can do when. If you look at the dialogue, and I can't point because I'm on my PlayStation, I can't point to it, but right below the dialogue there, you'll see this little dot, and this little dot will change whenever it's in the middle of the dialogue. I think it changes to dotted lines, so we can pay attention to that to see, but it'll change when the dialogue's happening. And you'll see that that option for start autoplay is there right now, but pay attention to what happens when when the dialogue's actually happening.
じゃあ、私
Dot goes away.
手伝った方が。
りちょっと怖いけど。
So the dot went away, but now two options are showing for me, and the autoplay option is now grayed out. It's still visible, but it's grayed out, so I can't actually do it. That's my assumption anyway, that I can't actually do that. You don't have to force yourself. Let's observe the situation first. So she said, so if I also stay and help, that still sounds kind of scary. I'm gonna say, let's observe the situation first.
じゃあ任せた。
So you'll also see that when the dialogue's coming in during talking, that it kind of types out while she's talking, and then the dot, I don't think the dot showed up until she was done, but that was a really short. Okay, then I'm counting on you. That was a really short one, but those details are things that are very important to pay attention to, because those things have to be designed back into the experience in anything that you're creating, and those details really matter, especially to people who are used to gaming. And that audience is way huger than you think. I promise. There are billions of gamers out there, and they have mental models that have been affected by their gaming experience. I learned that very quickly when I started doing usability testing for XR. Very quickly. Immediately, the gamers started referencing previous games and how they expect those games to behave, and which affected their expectations within that XR experience. So even if you are creating serious solutions, you still have to study gaming, because this is the mental model that people have for how these things behave. And I would say use a demographic that is broad, so non-gamers, heavy gamers, and so forth, is going to affect your user research, ability research, and studying your target audience. Especially if you're using absolutely, especially if you're using hardware that uses controllers. Okay, then I'm counting on you.
妙論派の行為を受けぬなら、知論派の生徒に授業をしなければならんと。わしよりも奴らの方がよっぽど嫌がっておるやもしれぬがな。
I have to teach students from Haravatat or Sharawara favor. Strikes me that they might be even less happy about such a deal than I am.
彼らの気持ちがなんとなくわかる気がします。
I think I can sympathize with them.
ただいま、ファルザン先輩。
We're back, Madam Farzan.
旅人が残って手伝ってくれるらしいんだ。
Arisa said she can stay and help you.
ほう、それは願ったりじゃのう。ちょうどアザールを懲らしめた旅人がどんなものか気になっておったところじゃが、迷惑ではないのか？
So another thing, another behavior that is important to pay attention to when you have dialogue showing like this is that, and this was another thing that was noticed during development of training with NPCs and dialogue, was that because we studied games and how they behaved, and it really did make a difference in our final product. But you can speed up the typing of this dialogue by clicking on confirm early, and that'll make all the dialogue show even though she's still talking, so you can read it at your own pace while she's talking. And you could also speed up that way if you don't want to wait and listen for the voice actor to catch up. You could actually fast forward that way, which is different, still at your own pace, but it gives you freedom and to go at truly your own pace instead of relying on autoplay, which can be too slow for some, too fast for others. But this is a good way of designing to get around that issue by giving you that option. So try that if you play your own games as well. Give it a try and see this behavior, but you have to make sure it's not on autoplay, I think, for this to work. But when the dialogue, if it's a longer piece of dialogue like this, if you hit confirm early while it's still talking, it will show you all the dialogue. But it'll still, the voice actor will still continue unless you select something else. Then they'll stop. That's another important thing. The voice actor will stop and the next thing will happen. Those fine little details are expected in games, and they're expected by gamers. So, why I couldn't ask for more. In fact, I'm rather curious about the type of person the traveler is. You were the one who taught Azara a lesson, after all. That said, will I be troubling you? It's no trouble at all. I specialize in solving problems. I will choose my specialize in that.
実は今ちょうどある問題に直面しておっての。
Is that so good? It does so happen that I do have something I need help with.
理論派で選択科目の授業を開くべきか、それとも妙論派で共同研究に携わることを選ぶべきか。おい、正直どっちも選びとうない。
Now, should I apply to teach a course with Harabatat or join the collaborative project that Sharuar is proposing? Honestly, I don't want to choose either of them. If it were me, I would say, what's option number 3? Or come up with my own option number 3. That would be what I would do and say, well, how about this instead? Something that would be more beneficial. Then I'd have to understand what's going on there, and I don't. Tell me more about the Haravatat course, or let's hear what this Star Wars collaborative project's about. I want to hear about the course.
ご存知かもしれませんが、知論派は言語や不問を研究する学派です。100年前、ファルザン先輩は知論派の学者でした。
You might have heard of it before. Haravatat is an academic faction that researches languages and runes. 100 years ago, Madame Farzan was a researcher from that darshan.
おいおい、100年前だけでなく、今もそうじゃぞ。
Now, not was, still am.
はい。ただ、今の知論派の学生たちは、先輩の研究方向をまるで理解できていないんです。選択科目講座を開いたとしても、聞きに来る者は誰もいないと思います。
Yes, of course, but current Haravatat students can't really understand her direction of research, so even if she opened a course, chances are no one would attend. Direction of research?
一言で言えば、現場にあった石碑や出土した文献に基づいて、遺跡にある各種仕掛けの構成や解法を解読するというものじゃ。まあ、汎用性の高い古典的な仕掛け関連の文献研究なんかも含まれるんじゃが。
In summary, I mean to interpret the configurations and solutions of ruin mechanisms via the deciphering of on-site stone carvings and unearthed documents. It'll include research into general documents dealing with such ancient machines. Well, that sounds interesting to me.
研究方法は今の知論派と大した差はないんですけど、内容は遺跡や仕掛け関連のものがほとんどです。仕掛けに詳しくない知論派の学生にとっては、実に理解しがたいものばかりです。
Research method is supported by Haravatat, yes, but the content deals heavily with both ruins and mechanisms. This will make it difficult for students of this darshan because they don't understand much about mechanisms. Then just teach about mechanisms.
加えて、詳細が明らかになっていない遺跡は年々少なくなってきている上、妙論派のギミック関連学術も発展したため、さほど勉強せずとも古代文字の解読に取り掛かれるようになりました。
Also, there are fewer and fewer unexplored ruins left nowadays, and Sharawar researchers have been developing their own theories on mechanisms. As such, they don't need to rely on ancient documents. I would personally disagree with that, because we can make all the interpretations we want, but if we don't understand the ancient documents, what does that matter? We need to understand it the way they understood it. My opinion. So this subject is what you might call a sunset industry. So she's doing a very niche research. I'm going to say niche.
それについては奴らがあまりにも傲慢なんじゃ。古代の仕掛けの危険さや複雑さは奴らの想像をはるかに超えたものじゃぞ。
They're far too complacent. Ancient mechanisms are more dangerous and complex than one might imagine.
教えてやるが、100年前は全くこのような雰囲気ではなかった。学者は皆様々な領域の知識を探求することに熱心で、未知なる仕掛けにも十分な畏敬を抱いておった。
Telling you things weren't like this 100 years ago. All researchers back then were interested in exploring knowledge from a variety of topics. They also gave more respect to unknown mechanisms.
今、主流学科や人気の研究しか見ようとせん奴らが来たとしても、そいつらを相手に授業する気などさらさらないわ。
Nowadays, all people are interested in are mainstream subjects and popular research. Even if they attended my course, I wouldn't be interested in teaching them.
それに、わしの研究が時代遅れだの、現実離れしておるだのを理由に、研究費の申請を却下する者までおるんじゃぞ。
Also, the people here think that my research is outdated and unrealistic, so they keep cutting my funding.
たく、奴らにコレイの爪の赤を煎じて飲ませてやりたいもんじゃ。勤勉さや学問に対する探求心、それから死に対する尊敬の念をきちんと学んでもらわんといかんわい。
If anyone watching this now or later has any experience with branching narrative or branching dialogue, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. Because even though I have experience working on projects with branching narrative, branching dialogue, it is a very vast subject and has its own field of expertise. So there's always something to learn about it. So I would love to hear from y'all as well on whether you're watching this now or later, on what are your thoughts about branching narrative and dialogue? Is it something brand new that you've never heard of before? Or do you have experience working in it already? Let me know, and let me know what your thoughts are on it. So I think they could all stand to learn from Calais. She's a hardworking child and respects her elders.
どうして突然私？
Why me?
はあ、わしの授業を聞いてくれる生徒が皆コレイのようじゃったらよかったのに。
So the dot was still showing. So maybe because you can like kind of fast forward through the dialogue by continuing to click confirm. I want to actually read it, but if I had already played this and we're going back through it for whatever reason, I might want to like quote unquote fast forward it. So then I would just keep hitting confirm to make it go faster. Which is also one of the great things about auto progress. Manual progress, not auto progress. Giving you the option. It's one of the great things about that. So if only those who came to my lectures were more like you. Yeah, it is showing.
ということは、ずっとガンダルバー村におる必要もないんじゃないのか?
It just doesn't show whenever there's an option for me to select a response. Speaking of which, are you feeling better? You don't have to confine yourself to Gandharva village anymore, right?
私、復習しなければならない文字がまだいっぱい残ってるのを思い出した。先に戻って師匠を探すよ。
I just remembered that I have a lot of studying to do. I need to head back and find Master. So my only option here is wait, I have an idea. Huh? So Colette needs to learn how to read, and you need to teach a course. So this is basically the same sentence, and it doesn't matter which one I choose, really. So I guess I'm going to that one.
つまり、わしがコレイのために読み書きの授業を開くということか?
Are you telling me to start a reading course for Colette? Huh?
待ってください。ティナリさんはまだ教令員と学術的な交流を続けているとはいえ、もう教令員に属していません。ですからコレイも教令員の学生とは呼べません。
Can't it be a public course?
確かに旅人の言う通りじゃ。 これまでの教令員は民を重視しておらんかった。じゃから傲慢な思想が生じてしまったんじゃ。
No, she's right. The old academia became consumed by their arrogance precisely because they ignored the public. How do people that aren't involved in the academia learn to read and write? Or are they just left on their own until they can become a student of the academia?
コレイのように勉強熱心なのに何らかの理由で願いが叶わなかった者は他にもスメールに多くおるはずじゃろ。
There must surely be many people like Kole and Sumeru who are passionate about learning but can't study due to various reasons.
教令員はそういう者たちを無視しておった。今コレイたちのために読み書きの授業を開くという思考は今後より多くの人に恩恵を与えるための一歩じゃ。
The old academia paid no heed to them, but if I start a reading course for Kole as a pilot, perhaps this shall come to benefit many more people in the future. I think it would.
それは規則に反していないかどうか一度戻って意見を聞いてからお返事します。
I'll need to go back and ask if this is in accordance with regulations.
そんな手間をかけんでもよい。わしがついてってやろう。何か問題があればその場で議論し合ってはっきりさせればよかろう。
Save yourself the extra trouble. I'll come with you. If there's any arguments to be had, we'll sweep them aside together.
旅人、コレイ。お前らは教令員の外でちと待っていてくれるか。すぐ戻る。
Arisa Kole, do wait for us a little while outside the academia. I'll be back in just a moment.
ああ、待って。私たちもついていこう。
Wait, let's catch up with her. Yes, she. So I want to see the line here. Progress here. So if we see this, we'll see my first moment of decision here was this was all just the dialogue that we finally got to the moment of decision of do I focus more on helping them or do I focus on getting her to go to help Tinari, which I guess was one of the other decision would have branched off into one of these two. So I've apparently already made a decision that is going off into a different branch. And there are 5 endings here. So we only see 3 so far, 3 lines coming out of this. So there's more moments of decision that are going to come out of this option. And again, the hearts are in... based on these decisions that I make in the dialogue and in the course of this narrative, how is my relation with Faruzan going to end at the end of this? I don't know. I haven't tried making them angry or doing things that would upset them to see how that would change. I kind of want to play it the straight way first. I could probably go back and replay it and try a different outcome, but I don't know if there actually is one or not. Based on how many hearts you have filled up. 5 are filled up right now because I haven't done anything upset her yet. So, yeah. So, we're at a moment of decision now. And again, if we review the Hazo one that I've already played, we'll see this is going to how this is going to turn out, because we're going to end up with different options here. We've already branched into one with the Faruzan dialogue, and now it's going to we're going to end up having multiple options that branch off at different places in the future. And again, I would move this better if I were on the PC version, but I'm on the PlayStation. I can't really do that. But there are 5 total options here for endings that branch out at some point. story continues on or doesn't continue at some point. So this is the same thing that's going to happen with Faruzan once we get to that ending. And yeah, so that's what's going to continue to happen with this thing. It is 1:30 my time, so we are going to stop this and continue. So what are your thoughts? What are your comments on this? I know we usually do a Rose Thorn Bud at the end, but since we're still playing it, I mean, we could do one real quick on what we have so far. So don't forget it. So let's go ahead and do that. So Rose Thorn Buds, let me get that set up here so y'all can see it. Um, At the end of each session, we'll do what's called a Rose Thorn Bud, which talks through what works, what goes well, based on best practices of whatever it is that we're doing, whatever that genre is, plus best practices of gaming UX, pillars of gaming UX based on the book by Celia Hodent. I can put a link to another video in here if you want to learn more about that. And I will also include in the show notes once this is over a link to that book. But Pillars of Gaming UX, that is me talking about the different pillars, walking you through them, usability and engageability based on gaming. And then also what are the best, what have I learned from designing for this in XR as well. And I'll base it on that. And then once we're done with the Rose Thorn Bud, we'll do translating into XR. So if this were an XR experience, a branching narrative instead of a 2D experience, PlayStation or whatever, you can also play this on mobile or on desktop because it's available on multiple platforms. What would we need to do if we were translating this into XR? And I've been kind of talking about that as we go, but would like to document it. And that's one of the ways that I like for one of the reasons I live stream, one of the ways that I would like for the audience to participate in this, regardless of whether you're watching this live stream or on demand later. I would like you to participate in this, making your observations, putting your comments in the chat, regardless of live or on demand, because I do pay attention to the comments. I will pay attention to them later. So you can still participate even if you aren't live. That's how I want this set up, so that you can still do this even if you can't make it to a live stream. But this is also going to help you learn and gain experience thinking through critically of these things, which is only going to help you as you progress in your own XR career. If you're wanting to get into XR, spatial computing now is what Apple calls it. It's been around. Spatial computing's been around for a long time, but trying still, I guess the industry's still trying to decide which term they want to go with for what it's called. So I don't know how it's going to end up, but right now it's called either XR or spatial computing. So extended reality is what XR stands for. So roses, let's think about the roses of what went well for this experience as far as usability and so forth. So if y'all want to participate in this now or later, and I put the roses up on the screen for you so you can see what questions we're asking right now. What went well? What was a highlight? What did you like about this? And so I'm just going to type mine in, and feel free to add yours now or later on demand. But I like that they show the branches of that they show the branches of the narrative as you make the different voices. So you can visually see it, which I like. I like that feature. if you want to go back and see where you made the decisions. And see the decision points. And I like that they also show a finishing image. It's their imagery again, their artwork is very good. All their characters are unique. Their music's good, all that. Also liked how they handle the manual versus auto progression. Auto progression, micro interactions. Well, I guess I'll put a dash here. And like how the NPC behaviors are handled. While conversing and waiting for responses. What about it though? So let's see. I like that it was what else did I say? This is gonna just be off the top of my head. There's something that I didn't like. I know that this is something that is too hard to do until we get AI involved in our branching narrative, which they're working on now. Some people are already doing it. But it would be nice if I had more options. But then, of course, you have to design for that. And that's the constraint, is you still have to design something to be able to react to that. So how do you do that? And how does that affect the story? So, and we talked about that last time in Wilder Myth, where, because this one is a, you can create all kinds of different combinations. The characters aren't really preset. You can roll characters, and they each have their own personalities, and you can choose the types of relationships they have, and you can choose. It's choices matter game, which is what we're looking at for branching narrative. And however, even with this, there are constraints that are added onto it. Even with this type, where there is much, much more option, there still has to be constraints because you have to design this thing and you have to make it still feasible within this world. So there has to be some kind of constraints that are involved. So that's going to be the same. And you can go back and check those videos if you want. I have two, I think two or three on this one, maybe three. You can go back and check those later. But I went through and I played through two of the same game, but with different characters, different decisions to see, okay, how does this vary depending on which character I choose or which thing I decide, and say, how did this change? And so I did that with Wilder Myth. I don't know if I would do that with this one. Maybe can. I don't know if it will let you with Genshin. Would be an interesting experiment to do, but by doing this exercise, I was able to figure out some of the constraints that they have in place here. So You can go back and review that later if you want. Said the constraints that they had put in place to make their system still work, with choices being what they are in that game. There's going to have to be some kind of constraints in any kind of narrative. And even if you're using AI for it, you're still going to have to give that AI some constraints to work within, because you don't want something that's Old West ending up in space unless that's part of your story. All of a sudden, right? So you're going to have to give it some constraints or it could go crazy on what happens. And then you have to design that artwork as well. So what are some other things that went well? What other things did I like? Um, I liked so I already mentioned the decision points and how you can see all the different decision points and the images and the micro interactions of those like design patterns that they have in there for the UI while you're handling the dialogue. NPC behaviors are well done as well. The hearts stress me out. They do. It's like, because now I have to worry about am I making them happy too? That just stresses me out. Social things, social stuff. But this is a hangout event. Um, the kind of like that um it's a deviation from the overall main story. I think it's called Archon quests in this game. They're called different things in different games. Like Final Fantasy 14 calls it main scenario quests, or main story quests or something. MSQ, main story quests. But they call it Archon quests here, and different games are going to call it different things. So the deviation from from the style of branching narrative that's available in the main story. That it is instead of, what was that type called? Quick map of many endings. Wait, what was the other one called? It's String of Pearls. Main story is String of Pearls. A pearl style. And then this one is like these hangout events are more of a map of many endings. Um, they're truly a map of many endings. And then the fact that you can actually see that map is pretty cool. So it lets you study how branching narrative works. So I've been looking forward to streaming this specifically because it shows you visually this branching narrative and how you have all these different endings and where your points of decision were. So if you wanted to go back in and play, oh, that's another thing I like actually. Um, Here, that you can go back later and you can play that decision point again at that point. You don't have to play through the whole thing to get back to that point. Get through the whole story, quest, whatever, to get back to that point, which I do like. I like that. So you can go back and see how did my decision make the difference and what is going to happen if I make a different one. So I like that. Um, and then what did I not like though? Something there were some places where I don't always like the options that I'm given, but that might be where the whole role playing thing comes in because if it were me, I wouldn't choose that option. Um, but this is a role playing game, so it's a matter of role playing. Show you what are thorns. Let's talk about thorns. Um, and thorns are what didn't go well, what was the low point, what did you not? Um, oh, but thinking back on, you can see your progress as you go, like that too. The map updates as you play. Narrative map. Lots of things I liked. Were there any things that you saw in this that you didn't think went well or that you thought were weird or anything? You can feel free to type those in the comments. Well, I will look at them now or later. Don't Sometimes there's only like one option. Um, doesn't always make sense. That it makes sense. Like, it always makes sense why there would be only one. There was one point in there where I was shaking my head because I was thinking, well, couldn't they at least think of another response? But then other times it does make sense. Like it made sense when it's. So there was one point when it was in the dialogue where it was necessary to for the story for there to be a response, but to tell you what's about to happen. So, but it's only one response because it's not really a choices matter at that point. That's where it makes sense because it's helping the story progress in a way that is tactical that tells you, okay, a situation's about to change. Like when that other girl from the academia was brought into the conversation that we were having with Faruzan, there had to be something in there to make that progress. And it was me saying something. I think what happened, my character. But then at other times, it was only one option, but it didn't really, or at least I didn't notice it making any difference. So could that, yeah, I think that there are some points in the story where it could have been thought out better in the dialogue options. Oh, and I was also talking about those things that were lost in translation, wasn't I? Um, the I'm guessing Chinese has something similar. I don't understand Chinese. I don't haven't learned the Chinese languages and which ones they're going to be for this when they made this game because it is a Chinese game. Um, but I'm playing it in Japanese because their voice acting is much better than English. But um, I guess it would be interesting to play it in Chinese. That's the original language, but I don't understand it, so I at least understand some Japanese, so I can make some observations about second language. Um, there are things that are being lost in translation from Japanese to English or from one language to another. For example, when like Faduzan's character, she's over 100 years old. Um, and uses an old form of Japanese. However, in the translation, the English translation is used in modern English instead of an older English. So my guess is it's the same in Chinese or whatever language they're speaking in the original, which I haven't looked at to see what that is. But whether that's Mandarin or whatever, I don't know. But I'm guessing it would be similar to that. It would be an older form of their cultural language. There are multiple languages within China, Mandarin, and there's like a standard Chinese and a Mandarin and different ones that I don't understand because I haven't studied their language. But in Japanese, there's old forms of Japanese that are entertaining to hear. That's what Farzan's speaking in. That's getting lost in translation. So they should have been using an older form of English instead of our modern English for the translation. Or maybe English is just too boring. So it hasn't changed because it's boring. Maybe that's the case. There's something else I didn't like. Can't think of anything right now, but ideally we want to have at least one bud per thorn. So we're gonna look at buds and we're gonna try to come up with a bud for each of these thorns. So because we're here to solve problems, not complain. So what would we do differently? What follow-up questions would we have if this were our own project? Would there be something that we could improve on this? So in this case, it would be explore, okay, dive deeper into the narrative creation to see if there are ways to improve the dialogue options. And so visually, we're going to connect that. So we can see this one goes with this one. Um, and then, so then that would be like a next step. Sometimes it's a question, sometimes it's a suggestion. Um, we're not always prescribing. We're saying, here's what we need to look into next. But sometimes we are prescribing, like if it's a best practice that is like proven with research this is how this needs to be. Like if people are getting sick and puking in your game, best practices, you need to fix that. And there are certain best practices that you can implement to fix that. Whereas, um, or like if you, it would never make it, obviously, onto the PlayStation if you didn't follow the PlayStation guidelines for it. But like if you set up your, this is just like an example that wouldn't happen. But if you were to set up your game for controller support and it's for the PlayStation, but all of the little icons are the Xbox or Nintendo controller instead of the PlayStation controller. That's bad design. So that would never happen. It wouldn't fly on the PlayStation, but it happens all the time on the PC. Happens all the time on the PC. Some things are being lost in translation from one language to another. And it happens all the time in VR, XR, when you're dealing with controllers, with controller interactions on different headsets. It happens all the time. And it's something that people need to pay attention very seriously. So that kind of thing we can prescribe and say, fix that, because fix it. But other times like this, it's more of going back in and exploring and we just say, okay, this is what we need to look at, but we're not prescribing this is what we have to fix. Here we have to go explore and see. It's better to do it that way and trust that the team knows what they're doing. You can give suggestions for things to explore and kind of give direction on what the outcome you're wanting to have is, but to actually sit here and prescribe is not always the best case because you have to verify based on all the different things that are going on in the creation and the constraints and the scope and all that so it's better to make suggestions and direct like of course you can like kind of steer but not hard set subscribe unless it's prescribe unless it's an actual best practice that they need, like the controller example. Some things are being lost in translation from one language to another. Character is over 100 years old and uses an old form of Japanese. However, in English, it's using an older version. Look into older forms of English to see if there are ways to make this more realistic. Okay, and then so we have one bud per thorn, and next time and I was talking about this, but when I'm going to continue looking at this, so I'll look at this again next stream and continue to so we can see how that progresses in the dialogue and how the choices affect the branch tree next time. And I'll see you next time. And I hope y'all have a good rest of your day and a good weekend. We will continue this. I'll see y'all next time. Have a good weekend. Watching.